Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Mastering Your Qualitative Methodology webinar. My name is Rachel. I'm a senior research analyst and mentor here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full service dissertation consulting company. So we are here to help with any stage of the dissertation that you're at, from topic development all the way through to the very, very end, and the discussion chapter, and even helping you out with your PowerPoint for your final defense. So there is some more information about us here on this first slide, and this will be presented at other times during the webinar today, and then we'll return to this at the end. But do be aware that we provide a complimentary consultation. So you can use the link that's available here. I believe it will be posted in the chat box as well. Or you can email info@statisticssolutions.com at any point. Get that consultation scheduled. And that's just an opportunity for us to talk more about your own unique dissertation needs, where you're at in the process, any hurdles that you've encountered, any help that you might need, so we can really, tailor our services to your needs and get you through in a timely manner. Okay, so today we are talking about qualitative methods and the methodology chapter. So we'll just start with a basic overview of kind of the main sections of your methods chapter, your methodology that you will want to touch on. And I should say also, if any questions come up during the webinar, you are welcome to type those into the question and answer panel. We will have time at the end for me to answer any questions. And then I also have ICDs with me today for some just tech support, making sure that everything goes smoothly. And if you have other more general questions that are not related to methods or methodology, but more related to our services, go ahead and ask those, and she will be answering them sort of as they come in during the webinar. All right. Otherwise, I will go through the methods related questions at the end. So again, I'm Rachel, I'm a senior research analyst and mentor. I do all of the qualitative related research things around here at Statistics Solutions. So we're talking about the methods chapter, and that's in a more traditional 5-chapter dissertation. That's usually your chapter 3. And so I really try to refer to the methods chapter as opposed to chapter 3 in the webinars, but I will slip up, and I'm sorry about that. And so if I do say chapter 3 and you have a different formula or different setup for your own dissertation, just know I'm talking about the methods chapter. So I've sort of pulled these sections from a lot of the different checklists that I have seen from students at different schools that I've worked with over the years. And so these are the sections in your methods chapter that you will find most commonly. Okay, so if you're feeling like you don't have a lot of good direction, maybe that your chair isn't providing you exactly what you need, you're not sure what to go in. If you get these sections into your methods chapter, you can't go wrong. Okay, certainly some schools vary a little bit from this. And if your school does have other checklists and requirements, always default to that. But in my experience, these are the most common sections. So we'll touch on each of these today and talk a little bit more about methods. So you've got your standard introduction, and then you want to talk about your research design, including your rationale and your justification for this. You should include a section on the role of the researcher. That is you. You will include a section on the methodology, a section on trustworthiness, issues of trustworthiness, and then present a summary. Okay, so let's touch on these. Okay, in the introduction, this is pretty standard and pretty basic. What you want to do is restate the purpose of your study. You want to do that upfront, very clearly. And ideally, you are going to copy and paste this verbatim from the purpose of your study that you have stated in chapters 1 and 2. Okay, so in your introductory chapter and in your literature review chapter, the purpose of the study always stays the same. You don't want to word it differently. It might be tempting because it feels redundant to say it differently. Just copy and paste that. Okay, purpose of the study, verbatim, same, written the same every single time that you see it. And then you want to preview the sections of the chapter. So this is really where in the introduction, you want to set up the alignment that you have already really established in your first chapters that have come before your methods chapter. So you want to highlight the purpose of the study, highlight the problem of the study, or problem, then purpose, right? The research questions, because everything that has to do with your methods chapter comes from those three things. Okay. So, I have students, clients who I work with a lot of the time ask me, what design is best? Well, the justification for your design comes from the problem that you have identified, the purpose for your study to address that problem, and the research questions that you have developed. Okay, that is the flow for aligning everything in your dissertation. So that's the starting point. It's also helpful to set this up in the introduction because those of you who have attended my webinars before know that I like this concept of holding the reader's hand as they read through your dissertation. There aren't surprises, it's not some like fun creative writing assignment, dissertations are very cut and dry. And so you really want to make sure that everything is logical, everything flows, and the reader does not feel sort of confused at any point or like they need to be flipping back and forth between pages in your manuscript. So the next section then would be the research design. And this is where you want to restate your research questions. So most commonly, these will be identified and stated in your first introduction chapter. Okay, so your chapter 1. That's maybe not the case. Okay, but again, most commonly, this is what I see is that you state your research questions in your first chapter. So here again, at the beginning of your methods chapter, restate those research questions. And again, verbatim, cut and paste or copy and paste, okay, from elsewhere. So state the research questions, and then you want to talk about whatever the sort of concept is that you're studying. So it might be a phenomenon, it might be a case, and that's going to depend on your design. But what is that core concept that you're studying? And again, this is related to your identified problem and the purpose of your study, okay? And then you want to talk about the research tradition and the research design. So are you conducting a qualitative or a quantitative study? And again, here in this case, this webinar is tailored to your qualitative methods chapter. We do have another webinar for those of you who are interested on your quantitative methods chapter. That does look a little bit different. So you identify that you are conducting a qualitative study, and then the design for that. So is it a case study? Is it a phenomenological study? Is it an ethnography? Okay, you state that right up front. And in this section, you need to provide the rationale or the justification for your design. So part of this is going to be talking a little bit enough about the different types of qualitative research designs so that you demonstrate that you understand those designs, what they're good for, and why they are not appropriate for your study. Okay, so just as you justify the reasoning behind the design you have selected, you're making the case, right? You're building an argument that based on your problem, your purpose, and your research questions, this is the design that is most appropriate. And here's why. And here is why these other designs are not appropriate. Okay, so you want to demonstrate familiarity so that your readers, so that your chair, so that your committee knows that you know something about qualitative research designs. Okay. Now, why should you use a qualitative design? Okay. They are most useful when you are going to be collecting textual data. So doing things like interviews. They're good for helping you to understand participants' experiences with the phenomenon, their perspectives on that, how they make sense of that experience. Okay. And so you would collect data through interviews, through focus groups, talking with people, right? That's what generates the textual data. But you might also do document analysis. You might conduct observations as well. So qualitative designs, your goal is not necessarily to generalize your findings in the same way that a quantitative study might be. Okay. Your goal is to really say something about this particular case or phenomenon and people who experienced it. Okay. We're not doing hypothesis testing in qualitative research. So you're not setting up a null hypothesis and an alternate hypothesis. Okay, you're using research questions. There are no hypotheses in your qualitative dissertations, and there's no need to quantify your results. Okay, so those are some just kind of general, why a qualitative design might be, or tradition might be appropriate. So there are different types of qualitative research designs, and this is not all of them. Okay, this is going to be just a high level overview of those that I see the most commonly, and then two others that are less common. So case studies, phenomenological studies, and generic qualitative studies are probably the three that I see the most commonly. Grounded theory and ethnography are less common and usually relegated to the more experienced qualitative researcher, or in the case of ethnography, particular disciplines. So a case study can be really helpful for looking at a case, an example of, your central concept, right? Over time, and you're looking at this really in depth. Okay, so it might be an atypical case where something looks very different from everything else around it, or how it should look. Okay, so let's say, you have a bunch of different elementary schools in the same school district, and all of them are performing at one level. And there's one in the district that is either, outperforming everyone else or underperforming all of the other schools. So that would be an atypical case. And so a case study might be really helpful here for understanding why. Why is this happening? Why is this school underperforming? Why is it overperforming? Why is it different from all of the other elementary schools in that district? Okay, or an exemplary case, something that really is, the exemplary, what else? The exemplar of the phenomenon or of the case, something that, typifies what that is. Okay. It might be that a case provides a counterpoint or a new direction. Okay. For, thinking about a phenomenon or the concept. Okay. Pointing in some new direction for research, something that we don't know a lot about, perhaps. So you could have single case studies and you could have multiple case studies. And then within that, there are a whole lot of other flavors that I'm not going to get into in this webinar. But what makes the case unique, whether it is single or multiple, is that they're bound by some uniting factor. So they have these very clear boundaries. This is what I'm looking at, A, B, C, D, E. This is what I'm not looking at. And so you delineate it, you bind it based on whatever those criteria are. Okay. Case studies are usually conducted with multiple methods of data collection. So here you're not going to get away with just doing interviews. You may do interviews, but you are probably going to do interviews with maybe different populations. You might do a document analysis. You might conduct observations. You're collecting data from lots of different data points. Okay, lots of different sources. So that's one of the things that kind of sets case studies apart. And case studies generate this really rich description of the case. So whatever that case is, so it's, if we're talking about the elementary school that is outperforming all of the other elementary schools in the district, you're going to get a rich description of that elementary school. What is going on there? You might be talking to teachers. You might be talking to administration. You might be looking at lesson plans. You might be looking at other documents, conducting classroom observations, and putting that all together to look at this one case from all different angles. And you examine themes that emerge from the study of each case. If there are multiple cases, you want to look at patterns across different cases if you're looking at a multiple case study. So this differs from phenomenological studies, which I also see used really frequently. And these are really good for what we call exploring the lived experiences. Okay, this is how do people experience a phenomenon? How do they make sense of that phenomenon? So it's not just that they have been through an experience, it's their thoughts, their perceptions, their meaning making about the experience. And this one, it is most common that you will see only interviews as the data collection method. These will be in-depth interviews. They will happen over really, quite a long period of time. They might take several hours, okay, because you're really looking at how people think about what they've gone through, okay? And ultimately, what you're looking for is how this shows the shared experiences, the commonalities of the experiences in people who have gone through whatever this experience is. So the goal is to find like the essence of that phenomenon, okay? What's shared amongst all of the participants. When a study isn't quite a case study, isn't quite a phenomenological study, it might be a generic study. And this is absolutely an appropriate qualitative design. It is a qualitative design. Generic in this case, I don't care what your chairs tell you. It doesn't mean that it is not as good as others, okay? Because, you can do a bad case study. You can do a bad phenomenological study, right? There's nothing inherent in the design that makes it good or bad. Okay, but generic qualitative designs are really helpful for when there are maybe elements of different designs that you want to borrow from. And when the focus is more sort of outer world, outward, okay, on the experience itself, and not the sort of meaning making that happens about the experience. It's not so psychological. Phenomenology really draws from psychology and philosophy, and how people make sense of these experiences. But in generic, it's really good, if you're not interested in that meaning making, that psychological level. You can also be mixed methods studies. You can use a generic design in a mixed method study if you're also doing something that has a quantitative component. So generic qualitative designs are really nice because they're flexible. You don't have to adhere to, for example, in phenomenology, there are specific phenomenological designs where you have to adhere to specific data collection practices and data analysis procedures. You don't have to do that with a generic qual design. So you might decide that interviews are appropriate. You might decide that questionnaires are appropriate, or written or oral surveys. Even again, you're not quantifying, that's not the point, but you can certainly have people, your participants write written narratives about their experiences. So the idea here is that it provides you with an understanding of the outer world content of a research question. So the focus is on the experience, not necessarily the participants. Grounded theory, I don't see very commonly, and there is good reason for this. It is really not for novice researchers. It's real tricky to do, and it takes a lot of time. But this is good qualitative design if you are, if you're looking at something that you don't know a whole lot about. I mean, not you as in, a person, as in there's little out there known about a topic. Okay, so just in general, you don't know a whole lot. And the idea is that you generate theory as the researcher. Okay, so it's called grounded theory because the theory is developed, the researcher develops the theory based on the data. So it can take a very long time, and I'm talking about years. Okay. So you may do interviews, you might do field work, you might do text or document analysis, a lot of memoing of ideas, theoretical saturation, where you just keep interviewing people and interviewing people and interviewing people until you're not seeing anything new that people are telling you. So the goal is to derive theory from the data. Okay, so you interview some people, you analyze the data, you memo, it generates more ideas, more questions, then you go back and you interview some more people, and this goes on and on and on, this recursive process. And at the end, then you develop a theory that explains your data. Okay, so produces a broad explanation of a process, an action, or an interaction. And then ethnography is another one that I see less commonly. Again, I think because it is seen really only in a couple of different disciplines in the social sciences, and because it can take years. So this is really good if you want to look at a problem within its sort of sociocultural context and really understand the culture. So it's this holistic inquiry. We're looking at a phenomenon within a network of people and institutions and sort of the cultural milieu. It is done through interviews. It's done through fieldwork and participant observation. Okay, which is where you would ideally go and live with the participants, live in the community where you are conducting your research for a very extended period of time. It's done through conversations with people that you might have just kind of on a daily basis. And it produces an in-depth account of this research problem in the cultural context and from the perspective of the participants. Okay, it's this sort of walking in their shoes kind of feeling. Okay, so in ethnography, this written description of the phenomenon. So all of that can kind of go into this research design section. All right. And so you've got some ideas now, just kind of at a higher level of what designs might be a good fit and why or why not. So the role of the researcher section is really important here too. And I think, I work with clients sometimes who are concerned that they're sort of talking about themselves in the context of their research. But this is, I think, really important because you need to identify your own role in the research. You have a role in your research. You have a role in your study. And like it or not, we all bring potential biases to our research, and that's okay. And I will argue all day long that this is true in quantitative studies as well, right? That there's no, I don't believe that there is a truly objective study, okay? Because our studies are conducted with humans and we are humans. So what you need to do is talk about your own place in all of this. Are you an observer? Are you just conducting interviews? Are you a participant? Are you a participant observer? Okay, what are you doing? What's your active role in this research? Are there any conflicts of interest or power dynamics between you and your participants? Okay, this could be as simple as you are doing a case study of the corporation that you work at. So maybe your participants are people who are known to you. They might be colleagues. They might even be friends outside of work. So what's the relationship there? You need to talk about that here. And you need to talk about how you plan to mitigate those. Okay, any power dynamics or any conflicts of interest that you might have. You also need to identify potential biases that you have about your research. Our research as qualitative researchers, the identified problem has to come from your literature review. The problem that your purpose is based on comes from the literature review. But let's be honest, a lot of times we're interested in a particular topic to begin with because we have some personal interest or stake in it. Okay, so that's something that you can talk about here and how you plan to mitigate these biases. Reflexivity. The best thing that we can do is be open and transparent about our role and how that impacts what we're doing. And then any other, applicable ethical issues. Okay, so, again, do you work at the study site, for example? That would be one possibility. In your methodology section, this is where you really want to outline, all of the steps for what you're doing. Okay, so you'll want to include a smaller section here on your participants. You want to talk about the population of participants. Who are you focused on? What's the population? Who are you drawing that sample from? Okay, you want to talk about your sampling strategy. In qualitative research, we're not really concerned with random sampling. We are more concerned with purposive sampling because, if we're looking at a phenomenon, and so we want to understand how people who have experienced the phenomenon think about it, then they're going to have something in common, that they've all been through that experience. So purposive sampling is where we set inclusion criteria that everybody has to, meet each of these different criteria to be able to participate. So in a lot of ways, it's going to be a relatively homogeneous group, a relatively homogeneous sample. And so you want to talk about what those inclusion criteria are and what the exclusion criteria are. So what are those characteristics of your participants? What criteria do they need to meet to be able to participate in your study? Okay, exclusion criteria. I think people get hung up on this because it's not the opposite of the inclusion criteria. So your exclusion criteria would be if someone otherwise qualifies to participate based on all inclusion criteria, what would still keep them from participating? Those would be your exclusion criteria. Okay. And then you want to talk about how you verify that people meet the inclusion criteria. How will you do that? You want to talk about the number of your participants, or if you're, doing a case study, you want to talk about the cases as well, and the number of cases. So your number of participants, so that's a sample. You want to outline very, very clearly, again, in a really logical way, holding the reader's hand, how you will identify those people who might meet your inclusion criteria first off, how you will contact them, and how you will recruit them to be in your study. Okay. And then most often I see that schools want some discussion of data saturation and how that relates to the size of your sample. So data saturation is really, you can think of it as the point at which more data fail to yield new information. Okay, so at some point we can sort of assume that if we keep interviewing more people, they're never going to tell us anything new. And so we can say that the data are saturated. So you want to talk about that. In your instrumentation section, this is where you want to think through all of the instruments of data collection that you will need, that you will use in order to address your research questions. So if you're conducting interviews, what questions will you ask? This will go in your interview protocol. These are not the same as your research questions, by the way. You do not interview people with your research questions. So you need to think through, okay, what questions do I need to ask people that will yield answers that address the overall research questions? Okay, if you're conducting observations, what is the protocol for that? How will you ensure that you're systematically conducting observations across, say, 5 different classrooms, and that you're looking for all of the same things across all 5? Okay, so you might have an observation sheet, like a checklist that you use. So for each instrument, then you want to identify that. Will you create it yourself? Okay, is this something that you've maybe developed based on what you've learned from your literature review? Or is there something already published that you could use? Okay. If you are doing a document review, very similar. You want to identify what documents those are, what those sources are, and in this case, how you can verify their accuracy. Okay, so that's really kind of the important part here. So essentially what you're doing is for each data collection instrument that you use, and again, like I said, if you're doing a phenomenological study, you may only have an interview protocol, and that's fine because that's appropriate based on the design. Okay. What you want to do is demonstrate how all of those different sources of data are sufficient to address the research questions. So sometimes it can be helpful to set up a table where you put the research question or questions in the table and, align specifically, okay, research question 1, I will need to conduct interviews and I will need to conduct observations. And together, those 2 data sources will tell me what I need to know to address that research question. And for research question 2, you do the same thing. Okay, and so if it helps to think about it as maybe like a table to begin with, and then you can start drafting it in narrative form, that might be really helpful because it does have to be aligned. Then what you need to do is talk about all of your procedures. Okay, so for each of those instruments, you want to provide more detail. Okay, where will data be collected? Okay, and yeah, right now it might be via Zoom. Okay, because perhaps a quiet room at the library is not an option right now because we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Okay, so you will talk about how you will collect data via Zoom. Will you use audio, or of course you'll use audio? Will you use visual recording? That kind of information. Are you the one collecting the data, or are you lucky enough, and if you are, oh boy, lucky you, that you're on a project where you have a research assistant who will collect data? Okay, and if that's the case, then you talk about that. You want to talk about the frequency of data collection. If you're conducting observations, are you doing them once a week? Are you doing them 3 times a week? Okay, so identify the frequency, the duration, okay, both in terms of, if you expect interviews to go for 2 hours, but also that over the course of, say, 2 months, you will be conducting interviews with all of your participants. So the frequency, the duration, how you will record the data. Certainly most common is audio recording, but it's also really handy to take some handwritten notes as well. And you want to talk about contingency plans to account for attrition. What happens if you are unable to recruit the intended number of participants? Or what happens if you are able to recruit the intended number and then you lose some to attrition, which almost always happens? Okay, what are your backup plans for making sure that you get the right number of participants? Talk about your debriefing procedures, and this can be especially important if you're dealing with sensitive topics. Okay, if it is something that might cause some trauma or potential re-traumatization, your research topic is something like that. Debriefing procedures where, say, you provide resources for if participants need to talk to someone after the interview, then that would be appropriate. And then follow-up procedures as well. So if there are transcript verifications that you're going to be doing, if there's member checking that you're going to be doing, you include all of that here in this procedures section, or subsection rather, of the methodology section. And then you want to talk about your data analysis plan. So in this case, that you've got your instruments set up, you've got your participants set up, you've got everything fully aligned, from your problem to your purpose that'll address the problem, to the research questions that'll get you the answers to address the problem and the purpose, to the design, which is the best possible design for you to address all of that I just talked about. And then you collect your data, and then you need to analyze it. So what you will outline in your methods chapter for your data analysis is the plan. How will you analyze those data? So this can be really helpful too, for, thinking through, okay, how do I need to analyze these data so that they address the research question? Okay, so coding procedures that you will use. Will you be doing a thematic analysis? Will you be doing a quasi or modified quasi phenomenological analysis or interpretative phenomenological analysis? You want to talk about all of the procedures associated with the coding and categorizing or thematizing of your data. Any software that you plan to use. There are amazing programs available that will assist with data analysis. And when I say assist, I don't mean they do it for you, because they sure don't. That is you as the researcher take an active role in the analytic process, but the programs can really help organize and visualize your data. So you can see really clearly connections between different patterns. Okay. And then talking about how you plan to handle discrepant cases. And this is where you might start seeing patterns as you analyze data across all of your participants. They've all sort of experienced a phenomenon the same way. And then you have one participant who had just a very, say, different view of it. Maybe maybe everyone else's experience, this is a gross simplification, but maybe everybody had a really great experience of something and one participant had a really negative experience, or vice versa. So that would be a discrepant case. It doesn't fit within that pattern. Okay, so how do you handle that? How do you factor that into the analysis? Okay, how you plan to handle that? So finally, you want to include a section on trustworthiness. And there are sort of 4 tenets for issues related to trustworthiness that have been identified in the literature by previous researchers. So credibility, okay, how accurate are your findings? How confident can we be that your findings are accurate? Transferability, so do your findings apply? Do they transfer to other contexts, maybe a different sample, maybe a different geographical region? Are they dependable? Okay, so with replication of your study, are we going to see consistent results, consistent findings, and confirmability? So, you know, are your findings based on your participants and not yourself and what you think about the results or think about what your participants say? So it's based on what they said, not what you think about what they said. And so generally what I recommend is kind of within this section, devoting one paragraph to each of these four. So where you talk about, you know, here's what credibility is. Here's how you know that I know what I'm talking about. And, you know, you support that with your citations and you talk about credibility. And then you talk about how you will establish this in your own study. And you do that for each of the four. So triangulation is really helpful for credibility. Rich description is one idea for transferability, dependability, sufficient information description. So again, that's sort of like rich description, creating an audit trail so someone can follow along. They know what you did and understand why you did it. Member checking, so having your participants review your findings, the synopsis of your findings, talking to you a little bit more about, you know, do those findings work? Do they reflect that participant's experience and why or why not? Okay. And things like rich description, member checking, triangulation, these are not, you know, triangulation is not only helpful for credibility, it's also helpful for these other aspects of trustworthiness. So these are not mutually exclusive, basically, is what I'm trying to tell you here. So that's where you set this all up, is in this section. And then you'll want to talk about ethical procedures. We're working with human subjects. We're working with people. Okay, so it requires a special consideration. So you want to obtain site permission, certainly from the place where you plan to conduct your research. You also need to obtain your institutional review board permission as well. So you'll talk about that in this section on ethical procedures. You know, you consider outlining, you know, the principles in the Belmont report, for example, talking about that and how you'll establish, you know, beneficence and justice and all of those things, respect for persons. So, you know, you want to include, a lot of times I see you'll include your Irb approval number so that, you know, it's just very clear in the actual narrative of the chapter, your Irb approval, that you have established, sought, and received approval from the site. You know, so again, if we go back to our school example, you know, maybe you need the superintendent's approval. So you talk about that here, talk about any of those agreements that you have to conduct the research. And then, you know, talking about different ethical considerations related to recruitment and related to data collection. So, you know, recruitment, just as an example, you know, how will you ensure that you are recruiting someone in a way that other people won't find out that they are participating in the study? You know, so instead of, you know, if you're a teacher, instead of going up to a colleague in the hall surrounded by a lot of other people and saying, hey, will you be in my study? And they say yes, right? Then that's not necessarily confidential anymore. Okay, so how will you do that in a confidential manner? And ethical considerations related to data collection as well. How will you ensure, again, you know, maybe it's right in the old days where we had private locations where we could talk to people, you know, and not run the risk of, you know, contracting COVID. Things were a little bit different here for data collection. But, you know, you're probably not going to conduct an interview in I don't know, a coffee shop where there are a lot of other people around, right? Because that would, there'd be issues related to confidentiality there. So thinking through all of those ethical considerations and including those in this section, and then how you treat the data. So, your data are probably not anonymous. Your participants are probably not anonymous. If they were, you wouldn't know who the people were. Okay. And that's generally not true of qualitative studies. What you do then, because you know at least first names of your participants, is you want to maintain their confidentiality and make sure that their data are secure so that nobody else has access to the data and nobody knows that they participated in your study. Okay, so how you plan to secure the data. And this is, one of those where, it's really kind of nitpicky about, like, I will keep my data in a locked filing cabinet and it'll be in a secured office and I'm the only one who has a key to this office. And that's kind of the level that you want to get to, because your IRB really wants to make sure that your participants are safe from harm. And then after the study is over, how you will destroy the data. It's generally after a period of about 5 years, give or take. It usually depends on the institution. They'll tell you how long you have to keep your data. And then again, for a summary, summarize your main points. Recap what you talked about, each of the major sections in the chapter. Pull the reader along. Don't make them go back, sift through different pages, right? Here was the problem. Here's the purpose. Here are the research questions. Here's the methods that I'm using, the methodology in order to address all of that and provide that transition into your results chapter. So those are the main, again, like I said, if you're not getting a lot of guidance and you're going, oh my gosh, what should I put into my chapter 3? If you hit those sections, you will be set. Okay. Now, some other just general tips. Okay. Chapter 3 is where I see my clients get very nervous. It is daunting because chapter 3, unlike your literature review, and I don't know if you're like me, but I could do the research and write about it all day long. That's easy. Synthesizing a lot of literature, that's easy. But thinking through a project that I haven't started yet is a totally different story. Okay. And so this is where I see people really spin their wheels because there are so many what ifs. And what you have to do is get over the what ifs. What if something goes wrong? Well, it's going to. Okay. It's totally fine if it goes wrong. What if it doesn't all go according to plan? Well, guess what? Everybody who started their dissertation, in the last couple of years, nothing has gone according to plan because we are in the middle of a pandemic, right? So your methods chapter is going to look different from what happens in reality. That's fine. What I recommend is, again, start with your problem, start with your purpose, start with your research questions, and ask yourself, what data do I need to answer the research questions? Who do I need to talk to? What do those people look like? What are their characteristics? Who's going to give me the answers to address all of this? What documents will give me the answers? What observations will give me the answers? And use that as a starting point. Break it down for each data, each part of the data collection. Okay, like I said, make a table. That can be really helpful. Here's research question 1, and here are the different types of data that will help me answer this research question. And okay, so the people that I need to talk to get this research question answered are going to be, this group and this group and this group. Great. So there you go. So think about it as writing a recipe. And recipes have 2 parts, right? They have the ingredients and they have the instructions. The methods are the ingredients. The methodology are the instructions. Okay. So you can try to make a recipe with just the ingredients, but it's probably not going to turn out very well. Maybe you're a better cook than I am, but that isn't usually how it works out. Okay, so you want detailed instructions so that just like with a recipe, someone else can follow along and it all makes sense. So you provide the ingredients, those are the methods, like I said, and you provide the instructions, the how-to. Your methods, your methodology are going to change. They change all the time. That's what happens. Okay. This chapter is your expectation chapter. It will not likely be your reality chapter. Again, those of you who have been at my other webinars know that I talk about this in the context of the results chapter. That chapter, the results chapter is where you talk about what changed from your methods chapter. Things are going to change. Don't worry about that as you're writing chapter 3, as you're writing your methods chapter. As you're working through your methods chapter, focus on, you know, the in a perfect, but also a practical world. Like, here's what I plan to do. Okay. And then just say, don't what if yourself to death. Okay. Because all of that can go right into your results chapter and it's going to be fine. Right. So we do have some time for question and answers. And I do want to make sure you have this information. Again, my name's Rachel, and I am with Statistics Solutions, I'm a qualitative research analyst, and we are a full service dissertation consulting company. So we specialize in working with graduate students to help you get through your dissertation in a timely manner, which is what everybody wants, right? You're at the end of your rope and you need some help. Okay, so that's why we're here. We do provide a complimentary 30-minute consultation. We are available during sort of regular business hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. That's Eastern time. More information, it's our contact information here. But again, with the complimentary consultation, this is where we get to know you a little bit better in your project and kind of figure out the best path forward so that we can really tailor our services to helping you get through quickly. Okay. And, you know, especially in the case where you may not have a lot of support from your chair or your committee. Okay, we are here for you. So I've got a couple of questions. Qualitative descriptive design it's not a generic design. So the question is, you know, are you familiar with qualitative descriptive design? Can you share a little about that? It's not that it is a generic design as such, but it does mimic the qualitative descriptive does mimic the generic a little bit more because you are looking to describe something. So you're not doing that sort of inward psychological reflection, you know, but a case study could also be descriptive. So there's a little bit of room there as well. The next question is, oh boy, what's a feasible and practical timeline from start of research to finish? Is it even unreasonable to have that timeline? You know, I mean, I don't know that it's unreasonable to have the timeline, but because I think that goals are good and goals keep us focused. But I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't put like a ton of pressure on yourself. It depends certainly on the discipline. You know, I will share, I'm an anthropologist by training. Our bread and butter is ethnography, and we are in the field for, you know, a year or two at a time. So I took 7 years to finish, from start to finish. I also had colleagues and friends of mine who started in my cohort who were done in 3 years. Okay. So, you know, it depends on the discipline. It depends on the type of data collection you are doing. It depends on, are you coming in to, you know, some are really lucky. They come in to a project that their chair already has in place. Okay, and so they've already got a project and they are ready to hit the ground running. That wasn't me. And then my project also changed a couple of times, and that was just how that went. So, but I've also seen people in programs longer than I was in mine. There are statutes of limitations. I think some of them will kick you out after a little while. So that's certainly one thing to consider. But, yeah. So anyway, the short answer is that it varies. And the long answer is also it varies, and here are all the reasons why. Another question, do I have specific thoughts on data analysis programs, or is it just best to use Excel? So you can use Excel. You can even use Microsoft Word, and just like highlight and underline and sort of assign all those to different codes. I work most commonly with NVivo. I've also worked with Atlas TI. I have also worked with MaxQDA, Deduce. So my short answer for you, Allison, related to data analysis programs is that they all fundamentally do the same thing, which is help you organize your research. They just do it in different ways. But there are a lot of bells and whistles that you're probably not ever going to need. So my specific thought on data analysis program is, there's going to be a bit of a learning curve with any of them. So if your school makes one available to you at a reduced cost, go with that one, or whichever is kind of the least expensive. Deduce is kind of cool because it's all web-based and you only pay for the months that you use it. And when I was working, it was maybe $13 a month or something. So that was kind of cool. But again, they all sort of fundamentally do the same thing. They just have different quirks, different bells and whistles, but they really shine with the organization and visualization. I've got time for one last question, and it is, how do you pivot data collection during this pandemic? We're going to do focus groups and observations. That doesn't seem likely now, right? Yeah, well, so don't be discouraged. Number one, I'm sure that a lot of people probably are feeling anxious and nervous and discouraged perhaps, and all of that. But everyone's in the same situation here. So focus groups, I've absolutely worked with clients in the last year who have conducted focus groups over Zoom or other, video conferencing. Yeah, just like with interviews, you might lose out on a little bit of, some of the body language and those kinds of things that you would get in person. But, that's okay. It's okay. So I would say focus groups absolutely can still work. I don't know, enough to know about your sort of observations, but I mean, certainly I'm thinking like, just as an example, if you were observing like a classroom and that classroom is now a Zoom online classroom, that's still a possibility. It's just going to look a little bit different, but it's okay. It's really okay. It looks different for everybody. Everybody who started before last year is in the same situation, and just takes a little tweaking and it's all going to be fine. It's still totally doable. Okay, so we are at 2:00, which means our hour is unfortunately and regrettably up. Thank you so much for joining this afternoon. I hope that this was helpful for all of you. I want you to go forth. Don't be nervous. Don't get caught up in the what ifs. Just make your plans and know that they'll probably look a little different in reality, and that it's okay. And if you need more help and support, we are here. So again, our contact information is available, and you will all be receiving a copy of this webinar recording tomorrow. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day wherever you are. Take care. Bye-bye.